It was a Tuesday morning. Quiet. Nothing remarkable in the air except the smell of burnt toast I'd forgotten in the kitchen. I remember the way the phone rang, sharp, sudden, like it already knew what it was about to do to me. When I saw Daniel's name flash on the screen, I felt something twist in my gut. My son rarely called. We hadn't spoken in weeks, maybe months. I answered quickly, already bracing for something. But not this. "Dad," he said, voice flat. "Mom passed last night." Before we dive into the drama, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. You'll be hooked from the first moment. There was no pause, no breath. Just passed. Like it was a package delayed in the mail. I sat down, hard. The silence between us was a canyon. I thought I hadn't heard him right. "What did you say?" I whispered. "She's gone. We're holding a small service. Just close family and friends." "Of course," I said, trying to catch up with the speed of it. "Let me know the time and place." There was a beat. "You're not coming," he said. I laughed, but it cracked in my throat. "Don't be ridiculous, Daniel. She's my wife." "I know, and that's exactly why. You'll only ruin it." It was like something inside me broke clean down the middle. I blinked, not even sure what he meant. Ruin it? By grieving? By standing there in the back pew, quiet and invisible, mourning the woman I spent 40 years with? "Daniel, she was my whole life," I said, my voice trembling now. "You can't be serious." "I am," he replied. "This is about her, not about you." And with that, the line went dead. I sat there for I don't know how long. The toast turned to charcoal. The house, already too quiet since she went into the hospital, suddenly felt like a tomb. I wasn't just grieving a wife, I was grieving a role, a title, a place in the world that no longer existed. I tried to make sense of it. Was I that unbearable? That hated? Had I become some ghost haunting my own family? The more I replayed his words, the more I saw it for what it was. This wasn't about grief. It wasn't about space. This was punishment, cold, deliberate, and cruel. And somehow, in the middle of all this loss, I knew I wasn't allowed to mourn. Not publicly, not properly, not as her husband. I was no longer part of the story. She used to hum when she cooked, little tunes with no name, just soft melodies that floated around the kitchen like perfume. I'd walk in from work, tired and worn out, and there she'd be, sleeves rolled up, a smear of flour on her cheek, humming some made-up lullaby while the stew simmered. Her name was Helen. God, even saying it now feels like opening an old book, one you once loved but haven't dared to read again for fear the pages will fall apart. We met in the fall of 1978. She wore a yellow dress the day I saw her, standing at the back of a church hall during some community dinner. I didn't believe in love at first sight until that moment. She had this gentleness to her, not weakness. No, never that. It was strength in softness. She listened more than she spoke. She forgave quicker than she should have. She saw the best in everyone, especially me. We got married young, built a life out of hand-me-down furniture, handwritten grocery lists, and cheap wine on Friday nights. For a time, we were inseparable. I worked long days, sometimes nights. But she understood. She always did. She raised Daniel like the sun rose and set with him. And maybe, in her eyes, it did. She had a way of making a house feel warm, even when we didn't have heat. I remember coming home one snowy evening to find candles lit, soup on the stove, and Daniel giggling as she taught him to make sock puppets. I had been angry that day. Some issue at work, some mistake. But the second I stepped inside, it melted. But life isn't a song. It's noise. And slowly the music between us faded. She got sick a few years ago. It started with fatigue, then appointments, then diagnoses. I buried myself in work, thinking if I just made more money, found better doctors, paid more bills, I could save her. I wasn't there in the way she needed. Not emotionally. Not really. We stopped talking like we used to. She'd sit at the window in the evenings, watching the garden grow wild, while I stayed in my office answering emails, pretending I didn't see the distance forming like frost on a window pane. And Daniel, he grew colder too, protective of her in ways that seemed to shut me out, like he was shielding her from me, as if I had become the villain in a story I didn't know I was part of. Looking back now, I wonder if I failed her. Not in the loud, obvious ways. I never cheated. I never raised a hand. But I stopped showing up emotionally. I stopped saying, "I see you." I thought being the provider was enough. It wasn't. She deserved more than my silence, my absence, my logical explanations for why I couldn't sit with her on the worst nights of her life. Maybe Daniel saw that. Maybe that's why he said what he said. And maybe, just maybe, I earned it. Daniel wasn't always like this. There was a time he used to run into my arms shouting, "Daddy!" like I was some kind of superhero. He had this mop of dark hair and eyes that sparkled with questions. A curious, stubborn little thing, always asking why the sky was blue or why birds didn't get electrocuted on wires. Helen used to laugh and say, "He gets that from you." But I don't think so. Daniel was different from me. Sensitive, emotional. The kind of kid who cried during movies and hid under the table if he thought we were arguing. I tried to toughen him up, not out of cruelty, but because I knew the world wasn't going to cradle him the way his mother did. I thought I was doing the right thing. Helen would cuddle him after I scolded him. Sometimes I could see it in her eyes, the quiet disapproval. She never said it, not directly. But I could feel it, the distance, the judgment, like I was some lumbering force crashing through a house of glass. As Daniel grew older, he clung to her more. She understood his softness, encouraged it. Me. I tried to mold him, taught him to shake hands firmly, to look people in the eye, to stop crying over spilled milk. I thought I was raising a man. But somewhere along the way, I became the problem. It started small. I'd walk into a room and they'd go quiet. They shared jokes I wasn't part of. Inside, glances. I told myself it was just a phase. Teenagers and their moods. But it never really ended. By the time he was in college, he barely called me. Helen said, "He's busy." But he always had time for her. Always. And I kept thinking, where did I go wrong? I paid his tuition. I fixed his car. I helped him move into every dorm, every apartment. I was there in all the ways I thought mattered. But somehow, none of it counted. Once, years ago, during a particularly tense dinner, Daniel muttered, "You never actually knew me." I brushed it off, thought he was being dramatic. But now, that sentence echoes louder than anything he said at the funeral call. He didn't think I knew him. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was too busy trying to raise a version of myself. I never saw who he truly was. And now I see a man who looks at me like I'm a mistake his mother never corrected, a presence he tolerated, but never trusted. I wonder how long he's felt that way. I wonder if he ever loved me at all, or if that little boy who once ran into my arms disappeared a long time ago, and I was just too blind to notice. The last few years of Helen's life felt like watching a slow sunset. Beautiful in parts, but always fading, always slipping away, no matter how tightly you held on. Her illness came in whispers. At first, she brushed it off. A little fatigue, some nausea. "Just a bug," she said. But I knew better. You don't spend 4 decades with someone without knowing the difference between tired and not okay. Still, I let it go. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of what it might mean. So I buried myself in work, convinced that if I made enough money, if I kept the lights on and the insurance paid, I could fix whatever was wrong. But Helen didn't need money. She needed presence. By the time we got a diagnosis, the cancer had spread. Stage 4. It was like the floor collapsed under us, and I didn't know how to hold her without making her feel the weight of my own fear. So I kept my distance, not out of coldness, but out of helplessness. Daniel stepped in. He took leave from work, brought her meals, sat with her for hours, listening, laughing, helping her sort through old photographs. I watched from the hallway sometimes, listening to their quiet voices behind the door, and I felt like an outsider in my own home. They built something in those final months, a closeness I was no longer part of. And maybe that's when the shift became permanent. I remember once walking into her room with a cup of tea, and she smiled, polite, grateful, but not like before. Not like a wife greeting her husband, more like a patient tolerating a nurse. She didn't mean to hurt me. I truly believe that. But the silence between us grew thick. She stopped asking me to sit beside her, stopped reaching for my hand, and I, fool that I was, convinced myself it was her illness, not her heart turning away. Even when she was dying, I stayed busy. I handled the insurance, the hospice bills, the medication schedules. I did everything that could be listed on a checklist, but I never asked her, "What do you need from me?" Not the provider, not the planner, just the man she married. In the end, she gave more of herself to Daniel than she ever gave back to me. And maybe that was her choice. But now, sitting in this quiet house, exiled from her funeral, I see it differently. Maybe it wasn't just a shift. Maybe it was a slow rebranding, a rewriting of our roles, where Daniel became the caretaker, the confidant, the son-turned-hero, and I became the emotionally absent husband, barely worthy of a goodbye. Maybe my silence, my way of coping, was mistaken for indifference. And maybe Daniel spent those last few months crafting a story where I didn't deserve to grieve, not because it was true, but because it was easier to blame me than to confront his own fear of losing her. And now, that version of me, the distant, cold figure, has become gospel, because the dead don't speak, and the living, they write the story. The day of the funeral arrived like a thief, unannounced, unwanted, and cold. I woke up early that morning, even though I had nowhere to go. My body still moved out of habit. Shave, press a suit, polish my shoes, the same way I'd done for weddings, anniversaries, and every important moment we'd shared. But this time, the ritual was hollow. There was no place set for me at the table of mourning. I was dressed for a door that wouldn't open. Still I drove. I sat in the parking lot of the chapel, engine off, hands clenched around the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the windshield, I saw them. The guests, the florists unloading lilies, the black dresses and solemn handshakes. Familiar faces I hadn't seen in years. Some of them had hugged me at our wedding. Some had danced with Helen under fairy lights in our backyard. Now they walked past me without even a glance. Then I saw Daniel. He stood tall, greeting people like a host. His suit was new, his eyes were dry. He hugged Helen's sister, shook hands with an old neighbor, nodded like a man in control. He didn't look for me. Not once. And when the service began, I stayed outside. I didn't dare try to enter. What would I say? I know you all decided I wasn't worth a seat, but I came anyway. I had enough self-respect not to beg for scraps of grief. So I sat there, engine off, window cracked open, listening. Through the soft breeze I caught fragments of eulogies. Her strength was unmatched. She was the light of every room. She found joy in the small things. I waited for my name, for any mention of us, the marriage, the home we built, the decades spent fighting and loving and raising a child together. Nothing. Not once did they say, wife of. Not once did they say, mother and father. I had been edited out of her life, like an unwanted character in someone else's story. I thought I could take the pain. I thought I could handle being uninvited. but nothing prepared me for the humiliation of being erased, not forgotten. Erased. People filed out after the service, wiping their eyes, holding tissues, hugging each other. I sank lower in my seat. No one noticed the man in the car, staring from behind tinted glass. Daniel walked out last, his face hard, unreadable. For a moment he looked in my direction. Our eyes met, just barely. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply turned and walked away. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about Helen anymore. This wasn't just grief. This was a message. You don't belong. You never did. And somehow, even as her body was laid to rest, mine stayed upright, while my soul was buried right beside her. The house was colder when I returned. Not physically, the thermostat still worked, but there was a hollowness to it now, as if the very walls had exhaled for the last time. Her slippers still sat by the bed. Her scarf, draped over the arm of the couch, still smelled faintly of lavender. I stood in the hallway for a long time, coat still on, staring at the quiet, waiting, somehow, for her voice to echo back. It didn't. There was no voice, no soft footsteps, no clatter of mugs in the kitchen, just me. I made tea out of habit, though I didn't drink it. I set out 2 cups, like I always did. Stupid. I kept thinking maybe I'd forgotten she was gone, that the funeral had been some dream, that the call from Daniel hadn't happened. But the silence wrapped around me like a noose, and each passing minute only pulled tighter. Eventually, I went to her desk. She always kept it neat. Letters filed, receipts stacked, pens capped. She handled all the small things in our life, things I didn't think twice about. It felt wrong, opening drawers that had once been hers. But I had to see. I needed to understand where I stood in the aftermath. That's when I found the will. It wasn't hidden. It had my name on it. The older version, the one we'd written years ago, back when trust was unbroken. But stapled to the back was a newer document, fresh, notarized, signed just weeks before she passed. And my name was gone. The house, the savings, the car, all listed under Daniel's name. There was a line, short, sharp, and devastating. I leave my worldly possessions to my son, Daniel, whom I trust to continue my legacy with love and care. Nothing for me, not a sentence, not even a thank you for the years we shared. I didn't cry. I just sat there, papers in hand, staring at the black ink that cut through 40 years like a blade. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't neglect. This was abandonment. They hadn't just shut the door on me. They locked it, painted over it, and acted like it was never there. No funeral, no eulogy, no name in the will. I was no longer a husband, no longer a father, just a man in a house that no longer felt like home. It's a strange thing, being alive while parts of you are quietly erased. I don't know what led me back into the attic. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was desperation. But something pulled me up there. Above the dust, the creaking floorboards, the smell of old cardboard and forgotten time. Her handwriting caught my eye first. A stack of envelopes bound together with a faded blue ribbon, tucked inside a shoebox labeled keepsakes. Each envelope bore my name. They were all addressed to me, but never sent. My hands trembled as I untied the ribbon. The first one was dated 2 years ago, shortly after her diagnosis. I sat down right there on the attic floor and began to read. "My love," it began. If you're reading this, I suppose I didn't have the courage to say these words aloud. I read through all of them, each letter more tender, more aching than the last. She wrote about the fear, the pain, the way her body was changing faster than she could accept. But more than that, she wrote about us. She missed me. She missed the way I used to dance with her in the kitchen, the way I'd bring her coffee before work. She said she saw the fear in my eyes and knew I didn't know how to help her, but that she never doubted my love, not for a second. And then, she wrote about Daniel. He's angry, so angry, and he doesn't know where to place it. I fear he's choosing the easy target. You. I hear the way he talks when you're not in the room. I try to defend you, but he shuts me down. He's rewriting you, and I don't know how to stop it. Tears streamed down my face as I read that. She knew. She saw what was happening. She felt me fading from the narrative, but didn't know how to hold the pieces together. One letter, written just a month before she died, broke me open completely. I wish I had more time. I wish I could fix what's grown between you and Daniel. I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. If he's reading this to you, maybe he'll understand, but something tells me he won't. I clutched those letters to my chest like they were lifelines, proof that I hadn't imagined it all, that I hadn't failed as completely as they made me believe. She didn't erase me. They did. And somehow, knowing that, knowing she saw me, loved me, still believed in me, made all the difference. The funeral hadn't been mine. The will hadn't been mine. But these letters were mine, and in them I heard her voice again. Software steady, real. It was buried in the fine print. I wouldn't have caught it if I hadn't gone back through the will again, this time with her letters beside me. Something in her words, the way she said, "If he's reading this to you," made me wonder. She had always been deliberate, thoughtful. Helen never left anything to chance. So I flipped through the pages again, slowly, carefully, and there it was, paragraph 14, subsection C, buried beneath a wall of legal language so dry it could crack your teeth. Lifelong residency rights granted to surviving spouse, contingent upon the spouse's decision to remain in the primary residence. Ownership is assigned to Daniel Hartley, but possession and use shall not be transferred until such time as the surviving spouse voluntarily vacates or is deceased. I read it 5 times. It didn't sink in until the 6th. She hadn't written me out. Not entirely. She gave Daniel the title, but she gave me the power to stay. As long as I wanted. It was her way of saying, "This is still your home, if you choose it to be." I sat back in my chair, papers spread across the desk, the weight of weeks, maybe years, lifting off my chest. For the first time since the call, since those cruel words from Daniel's mouth, I felt something stir deep in my gut. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter, steadier. Resolve. I had every legal right to stay here, in this house, in the place we built together. They tried to exile me from my own life, but Helen had left a door cracked open, just wide enough for me to walk through. And this time, I wasn't going to walk away. Let them grumble. Let Daniel rage. Let the neighbors whisper. I was done retreating. I walked through the house slowly that evening, touching the frames on the walls, running my hand along the dining table where we once played cards, tracing the doorframe where we'd marked Daniel's height year after year. They'd tried to turn this place into a tomb, a monument to absence. But I would not be a ghost. I would not be pushed out of my own story. Helen may have been gone, but her words, her quiet defiance, lived on in that footnote. A single sentence that said, "Stay." So I did. Not for revenge, not for pride, but because love, real love, leaves the light on, even when the world wants you in the dark. It was late afternoon when I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't need to look. I knew that engine, knew the way he slammed the door before his feet even hit the gravel. Daniel always moved like he was challenging the ground to push back. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, black, cold now, reading through Helen's letters again. I didn't hide them when he walked in. I wanted him to see them. He didn't knock, just opened the door like he owned the place, which technically he thought he did. His shoes tracked in dirt, and he looked around with the air of someone inspecting a rental property, not a childhood home. "You're still here," he said. I didn't respond right away. Took a sip of my coffee. Let the silence stretch. He dropped a folder on the table. "This is the deed transfer. I need you to sign the relinquishment paperwork." I looked at the folder, then at him. "Did you read the will?" "I wrote the will," he snapped. "Mom and I updated it together. You were out of the loop, as usual." I nodded slowly. "And yet, you missed something." He squinted. "What?" "Paragraph 14, subsection C." His mouth twitched. He didn't like not knowing something. Never did. "You should read it," I said, standing up. I walked past him, toward the living room window. "You'll find that I'm entitled to live here, for as long as I choose. You can't evict me. Not now. Not ever. Not unless I decide to leave." Daniel didn't move. He stayed by the table, his hand still resting on the folder. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "Why didn't she tell me that?" I turned to face him. "Maybe she knew you wouldn't listen." That landed. He looked away, jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to fight," he said. "I just want what's fair." "Do you?" I asked. Was it fair to lock me out of her funeral? Was it fair to erase me from the service, from the obituary, from every room that still smells like her perfume? He looked like he wanted to yell, maybe even cry, but he didn't. Instead, he said the one thing I never thought I'd hear from him. "She didn't ask for you, Dad. Not in the end." I flinched, but only slightly. "And you think that justifies what you've done?" "She was in pain. She needed peace. And you decided I was the pain." Silence. I took a deep breath and walked back to the table, picking up the folder. I didn't open it, just set it aside. "I'm not leaving, Daniel. This house may be in your name, but it was built with my hands, my money, my years, my memories. Your mother knew that, and that's why she made sure I could stay." He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The shift was already happening. The authority he came in with was slipping, second by second. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. And somehow, that quiet rattled him more than anything I could have shouted. I made dinner that night. Nothing fancy. Just roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The same meal Helen used to make every Sunday. She said it was the kind of food that reminded you of your roots. Daniel sat across from me, silent, arms crossed, picking at his plate like a man who had lost his appetite before the first bite. I didn't press him. We ate most of the meal in silence. Halfway through, I reached into the drawer beside me and placed the stack of letters between us. Helen's handwriting faced up. Daniel didn't touch them. "She wrote them to me," I said. "Never gave them to me. I found them after." He glanced at them, then back at his plate. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because they don't match the story you've been telling yourself." He scoffed. "Don't turn this into a guilt trip." "It's not guilt I want you to feel," I said softly. "It's the truth." He pushed back from the table slightly, defensive, restless. "She told me you were distant, that you buried yourself in work, that you left her alone." "She wasn't wrong," I admitted. "I was distant. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I thought if I fixed things on the outside, I was doing my part. Turns out she needed me on the inside." Daniel looked surprised by my honesty, like he'd expected a battle, not surrender. "But," I continued, tapping the top letter, "she also said you were rewriting me, that you were so angry, you stopped seeing me as a man and started treating me like a mistake." He swallowed hard. "She loved you," he said. "I never doubted that," I replied. "But she loved me too. And that part of her, the part that belonged to me, you've been trying to erase." He didn't deny it. I know I made mistakes, I said, but I was her husband, and I loved her the best I knew how. That may not have been enough for you, but it mattered to her. These letters prove it. He finally reached out and touched the top envelope. Just held it. Didn't open it. Didn't speak. I'm not asking you to forgive me, I said. And I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just needed to say it. Out loud. One last time. He stared down at the envelope like it might burn his hands. She never said these things to me, he whispered. She tried. But you'd already made up your mind. A long silence passed between us. No yelling, no dramatic scene. Just the weight of years pressing down on two men who had forgotten how to speak without hurting each other. I don't need you to believe every word, I said, standing up slowly. But I do need you to stop pretending I was never here. And with that, I left him at the table, alone, surrounded by the smell of roast chicken and the ghosts of truths too long buried. It started with the Wilsons. Old Mr. Wilson knocked on my door one morning with a covered dish, chicken casserole, the kind his wife used to make before her memory began to fade. He stood there awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot, eyes darting past me into the house. "Didn't see you at the service," he said carefully, handing me the dish. I didn't say anything, just took it and nodded. He waited. "They said you weren't well," he finally added. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they're saying?" He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Within days, the visits started. The bakers dropped off a pie. Carol from across the street offered to help with yard work. They came in quiet waves, each one a little more curious than the last, and always with the same unspoken question behind their eyes. Why weren't you there? I never offered a full explanation, just smiled politely and said, "Some decisions were made without me." That was enough, because this neighborhood, for all its gossip and lawn pride, still remembered the man who shoveled their driveways in the winter, who fixed Mrs. Gomez's porch light when her husband passed, who coached their sons in Little League before Daniel had even lost his baby teeth. They remembered me. And now, something wasn't sitting right. One afternoon, I overheard two women talking outside the coffee shop downtown. They didn't see me sitting by the window. And she didn't even mention him in the eulogy, not once. I thought that was strange. Well, I heard it was Daniel's decision. He said his father caused her stress. That man? Please. He worked his fingers to the bone for her. I don't believe it. I stirred my coffee and kept my head down. But inside, I felt something shift. For weeks, I'd been painted as a ghost, a cold man, undeserving of grief. But now, the cracks in Daniel's version of events were beginning to show. People were talking, whispering, wondering. They were starting to remember who I was before the silence, before the illness, the grief, the walls between father and son. And Daniel. He wasn't around to defend himself. He'd vanished again, probably thinking silence would preserve his version of the truth. But truth has a way of leaking out. In casserole dishes, in raised eyebrows, in half-finished sentences exchanged over fences. I didn't spread any rumors. I didn't correct anyone either. I just lived, watered the garden, walked to the mailbox, cleaned the porch, and every day the story rewrote itself, not with rage, not with revenge, but with quiet, undeniable presence. It was Helen who taught me that. Sometimes the loudest kind of justice is simply staying visible. I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. The knock was sharp, not the hesitant kind that neighbors used when they came by to check in. This one had purpose. I opened the door and found a man in a navy suit standing on my porch, holding a briefcase and a manila envelope. "Mr. Hartley?" he asked. I nodded, already bracing myself for some new insult, another document, Another reminder that I was unwanted in my own life. "I'm with Lawson and Finch," he said. "Your wife's estate attorney. May I come in?" I stepped aside, cautious but curious. He didn't sit, just opened the envelope and laid out 2 documents on the dining table. "This," he said, tapping the top page, "is a codicil, an amendment to the original will." I stared at the paper, unsure if I was ready to see more of what Helen had chosen to leave behind. Or not leave, in my case. "She added this shortly before she passed," he continued. "It wasn't shared with Daniel, per her instructions." I raised my eyes at that. He slid the second page toward me. "This clause here, paragraph 6, makes Daniel's inheritance conditional." I leaned closer. "Inheritance is to remain in full, contingent upon the respectful treatment of the surviving spouse. Should any attempt be made to remove, coerce, or diminish the rights of said spouse, all benefits shall be considered forfeit." I read it twice, then a third time. She protected me," I murmured. "She did," the lawyer confirmed. "And quietly, I might add. Helen was very specific. She didn't want this document used unless it became necessary. And if it does, we'll act accordingly. It's enforceable." I sat down slowly, the weight of those words anchoring me like roots. Daniel had thought he held all the cards, that his name on the deed meant power, control, final say. But Helen, even in her final days, had made sure I couldn't be discarded. She knew what might come. She knew Daniel's temper. She knew his pride. And yet, she didn't fight him with confrontation. She fought him with foresight. The lawyer packed his papers, gave me a business card, and nodded once before leaving. No fanfare, no drama, just quiet confirmation that I was not, in fact, powerless. I stood by the window, watching the leaves stir in the wind. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace. Not because I'd won, but because someone still believed I was worth protecting, even when I didn't believe it myself. Helen had left me no words at the service, but in ink, in law, in the fine print that everyone else missed, she'd said everything I needed to hear. You still matter. You still belong. And now, I held the one thing Daniel feared most. Not revenge. Authority. That night I sat at Helen's desk with one of her old fountain pens and a single sheet of paper. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that lets you hear your own breath. I didn't light the main lamp, just the small reading light she used to keep on when she'd write birthday cards or grocery lists with her neat little loops and curls. I used to tease her about those lists, how she always added milk last, even though it was the first thing we ever ran out of. Now I'd give anything to see her handwriting again. I began writing. Daniel. The words came slowly at first, stuttering out of me like water from a rusted pipe. I've spent weeks trying to understand how we got here. I don't know the moment things broke, but I know they did. Maybe it was me. Maybe I tried too hard to shape you instead of seeing you. Maybe I loved you through the wrong lens, the kind that tries to protect by pushing away. The pen scratched against the paper like a whisper. But I also know your mother wouldn't want us to stay broken. She loved you. She loved me. And I believe she hoped that after everything settled, we'd try to find our way back. I paused, looked out the window. The garden she once adored was dark, waiting on the other side of the glass. Her roses would bloom again soon. They always did, no matter how harsh the winter. I don't want to fight you anymore, son. I don't want to carry anger like a second skin. I've already buried the woman I loved. I won't bury the last of my family under pride and silence. My hand trembled slightly as I signed my name. No dramatic flourish, no final jab. Just love, quiet, imperfect, still standing. I placed the letter in an envelope and walked it down the hallway, stopping outside Daniel's old bedroom. The door hadn't been opened in years. Inside were posters still curling on the walls, a dusty guitar in the corner, and a faint smell of teenage cologne and lost time. I laid the envelope on his desk. No note, no instructions, just a message, waiting. Then I walked out and closed the door behind me, not with sorrow, not with bitterness, but with release. I wasn't writing to change his mind. I was writing so mine could finally rest. 3 weeks passed before I saw his car again. It was raining, one of those gentle spring rains that doesn't slam against the windows, just taps, soft and steady, like someone trying to be let in without waking the whole house. I was sitting in the den, watching the water slide down the glass, when I saw his headlights curve into the driveway. I didn't move. The door opened slowly this time. No slamming, no heavy footsteps, just the quiet shuffle of someone not sure if they're welcome. Daniel stood in the doorway, like a boy again. His eyes were tired. He held the envelope in one hand, the one I'd left in his old room. It was damp around the edges, like he'd taken it out in the rain. Or maybe dropped it. Or maybe just couldn't let go of it long enough to keep it safe. "I read it," he said. I nodded. I figured. He didn't sit right away, just stood there, shifting his weight like the floor might give way if he got too comfortable. "You didn't have to write that," he said, voice low. "Not after everything." "No," I replied, "but I needed to." A pause. Then, the smallest crack in his voice. "I was angry. Still am, maybe. I don't even know why sometimes." "I know," I said. "I was angry too. For a long time." Another silence settled between us. But this one wasn't tense. It was tired, worn. The kind of silence that follows a storm when the air is still thick but everything's already been said. "I didn't mean to erase you," he finally whispered. I looked at him, really looked, and saw it. The weight in his eyes, the guilt, the grief, the years he'd carried something he couldn't name. "I know," I said. "You just didn't know how else to carry your pain." He nodded once, then sat down across from me, hands folded like a boy waiting to be scolded. "I should have let you say goodbye," he said. I let that hang in the air for a moment before answering. She knew I didn't need a crowd to say it. He wiped at his eyes, quick and awkward, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a photo. The three of us years ago, standing in the backyard in front of Helen's roses. He set it on the table between us. "Do you think she'd forgive me?" I smiled. Not wide, just enough. She already did. And just like that, something softened. We didn't hug. We didn't cry in each other's arms. But we sat, together. Not as father and son, not yet, but as two men who had finally stopped running from the ache between them. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something. You don't always get the apology you deserve, but sometimes you get the one you need. The first bloom came in late April, a soft pink rose, curling open like a sigh, right at the edge of the garden where Helen used to kneel every Saturday morning with dirt under her fingernails and that straw sun hat she refused to throw away. It had been a while since I'd come out here. Too many memories rooted in the soil, too much of her in the scent of rosemary and lavender. But after Daniel's visit, I found myself drawn back. The garden had suffered in her absence, wild, overgrown, untrimmed like a song left unfinished. The trellis had tipped slightly, and the daisies were choking under ivy. Still, life was pushing through, persistent and quiet, just like she'd been. So I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. It wasn't about taming it. Helen never liked perfection in the garden. She always said, "Let the plants argue a little. That's how you know it's real." She left room for the chaos, the clashing colors, the things that didn't make sense but still belonged. I pruned gently, watered the roots she once whispered to, pulled weeds like I was undoing knots in my own chest. Each snip of the shears felt like a sentence. Each planted bulb, a whispered apology. I found her gloves in the shed. Still soft, still holding the curve of her fingers like they didn't know how to let go. And there, in the corner where she'd planted roses year after year, I planted a new one, a deep red, the kind she always said looked best against gray skies. I placed a small stone beside it. No inscription, just her initials carved with my old pocket knife. HMH, Helen Marie Hartley, my wife, my partner, the one who had seen all my worst and still tried to leave me with something beautiful. That garden isn't hers anymore. Not exactly. But it's not mine either. It's memory now. Living, blooming, forgiving. And every time I kneel in that soil, hands stained, back aching, I feel like I'm speaking her language again. Not through grief, but through love. I wasn't invited to the funeral, but I remember the first time I saw her in that yellow dress, sunlight bending around her, like even nature took notice. I remember the way she used to laugh, not loud, but full, like it came from the bones. I remember the quiet way she forgave me, again and again, not because I was always right, but because love mattered more than being right. I remember mornings with burnt toast and cold coffee, and her humming in the kitchen. I remember the small fights, too. The silence between us when we didn't have the words. The long drives where the air between us said more than either of us could. They took the service. They took the speeches, the flowers, the black suits, the rows of faces turned toward a closed casket, and a eulogy that never mentioned my name. But they didn't take my memories, and they damn sure didn't take my marriage. No matter what they tried to rewrite, I lived that life with her. I carried groceries with her in the rain, held her hair when she was sick, sat on the edge of our bed on the night Daniel was born, shaking like a leaf because I didn't know how to be a father yet, and she just smiled and said, "We'll figure it out." I wasn't invited, but I remember everything. And that's the thing about grief. You don't need permission to feel it. You don't need a seat at the front row to carry someone in your chest every single day. Helen knew that. That's why she left the footnote. That's why she wrote the letters. That's why, even now, when the house is quiet and the lights low, I still feel her hand on my shoulder when I sit at the table. She never wanted me to fight. She wanted me to stay. And I did. Not out of spite, not to prove a point, but because this was our life, and no one, not even our son, gets to tell me I didn't live it. They buried her without me. But I carry her everywhere, and I don't need an invitation to love what was mine.